Hi, Steph Corker.
Well, here we are on the mic. Hi, Mike.
I appreciate you making time to have this conversation. And we're going to flip the script today. So you get to lead the show. I'm super excited to sit back. It's still a conversation, and I'm going to let you decide the flow for today.
Well, I am really excited to be back on the mic because I have been listening to the Mike Method with great joy, and your guests have been nothing short of fabulous. And sometimes it's fun to have the host be the one to answer some questions. And I love getting to know the host, and it inspires me to just hear the types of conversations that will follow. So I'm grateful, I'm pumped, and I'm prepared. Watch out.
I love it. Let's do it.
We are recording on autumn equinox. It is the time of, the season of change. There's, heaps of back to school and whatnot. Yet I think there's something also in the air about change, and it felt like a really cool conversation to dive into. And so today I want to riff on change, and then we might riff in a few different places. And the piece I want to start with, when the season of change comes, we often think about, what am I going to change in my life? Like,
Mhm.
change means change. And I was actually struck by the opposite and wanted to ask you the first question of, what in your life is really great right now that you're like, heck, I don't want to change this. These are some things that I'm not interested in, or I'm so stoked about. I don't need to change these places, people, ways of being in my life.
It's a great question because I truly believe that we don't rise to our level of self-discipline. We fall to the level of our habits. And I'm very intentional with a lot of the habits in my life, which is great because I know I can do things consistently. The backside of it is actually is harder for me to actually change. I will say that I do CrossFit Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So that's a habit that I feel really sets me up for success throughout the week. Thursdays is yoga and stretching, and that enables me to do CrossFit 3 days a week. I just played pickleball for an hour and 40 minutes, which is my fun thing to do on either a Saturday or a Sunday. The habit of being out walking the dog regularly. I have a joint habit right now of listening to podcasts when I'm walking the dog and then deliberately not listening to podcasts. So one of the changes I made this summer was just being okay to be in silence and to actually just be fully present on walking the dog when I'm by myself, versus always having to stick my AirPods in my ears and have that. So that's a change I've been embracing. And I now love both. I now love listening to podcasts as I walk or audiobooks, and I love not doing that. It is interesting in that I'm thinking about white space a lot from a habit perspective, and embracing the habit of having unstructured time during my week. And I struggle with the concept of productivity of like, well, if I'm, what am I doing during that unstructured time? And literally feels unproductive. And yet, in the role I play in Virtus, it's really important for me to have time to just let all the meetings settle, let all the conversations settle, just be with my thoughts, let the great ideas pop up, because that doesn't happen when I'm in meetings, when I'm, running to the next thing, when I'm listening to a podcast, that doesn't occur. So I think, for me, continuing to embrace white space, is one of the habits that I want to do. We could talk about habits in my life for a very long time because it's very habitful. Those are the ones that are top of mind right now.
I love it. It makes me think about the power of showers and how people get some of their best ideas in the shower. And I think actually Post-it note, the company created waterproof Post-it notes and a
Oh, really?
waterproof pen
Oh,
meant
that's
for
so great.
people to put their ideas on the wall in the shower because they were like, oh my gosh, like it's the moment that
Yeah.
I have these great ideas. And I think that's just it around the season of change, of the act of like a tree being rooted and what it needs, and then the tree dropping some leaves. And so I'm wondering, you did mention like creating white space is
Yeah.
a habit. It's like dropping the idea that your calendar needs to be full. What does that look like or feel like? And I'm wondering if there are any other changes in your habits that you currently have. It's helpful truly to hear a leader say, I want white space. And when I have white space, it generates this feeling that I might not be so comfortable with yet. So I'm dancing with this new feeling.
Mhm.
Are there any other examples of places or spaces that you're dancing with change?
Before I answer that question, I just want to riff a little bit on this waterproof post-it note. It made me, and when you said, I great ideas come when in the shower. I think great ideas come jogging, riding a bike, walking the dog in the shower. Really, when I think, our brains have a chance to sit back and relax and actually allow neuroplasticity to take place, because it doesn't happen when we're using our brain on like distinct tasks. The one thing I actually miss, and there's some irony in this. So the first 8 years of my life, I was on the road a lot. Like I was at the highest status on every airline that I flew regularly, and hotels and rental car companies. And that was great when I traveled personally to have that. And I burnt out traveling that much. So when at the start of this 24 years ago, decided I wasn't going to travel for work unless it was a lot of fun. But regularly, I wasn't going to do business travel. And one of the things I miss, though, is that some of my most creative, thoughtful time actually was on planes. And flying to Toronto is 5 hours, or I was flying down to San Diego, LA, Portland, Seattle. I was like Texas. I was away a lot. So, and I had so much time on planes, and some of my best creative thinking actually occurred. I've actually thought about just driving to the airport sometimes and like finding someplace cool and like literally just flying there, going for lunch, and then turning around and flying back, because I don't have another place where I can spend 4 hours like that. And if I try to just do that at a coffee shop, and I do that at coffee shops, and it does work really well, I still miss being on planes for that kind of white space. So, and I'll answer your question. Your question was, what other habits are and changes am I thinking about? What's interesting, because when fall hits, like I play pickleball outside, so that's a change that shifts for me. I also feel like, outside of sporty type things, so I can say a lot about, skiing's coming up and that kind of thing. Um, the other thing that changes is that September always feels like New Year's. Like I wish that September was New Year's, because it really feels like the start of the work season post summer, and a lot happens between now and December. And I always do my goal habit, who I'm becoming. I do that work. I do a year end reflection. I do all of that over the holidays in December. And yet it almost feels like that work might actually serve me better, not thinking from a calendar perspective, but thinking from a seasonal perspective, and particularly going into September. I haven't journaled on that. It's just this thought that's kind of been like sitting in the back of my mind lately.
Sorry, Katie, I have to edit that out. I admittedly have been listening to the Mike Method, and on a podcast, you spoke about your changing ways as a dad, as a father, and as your daughter is growing up, you have the opportunity to become a different version of a dad because some of the past based behaviors aren't maybe resonating as much as a daughter grows. And that is totally natural and super normal. And it's really inspiring to me because I'm like, oh, of course, like I'm not the same person I was 10 years ago. And now I relate to the world in a different way. But what I have to share is that it's really sweet to hear a father say, I'm going to work on who I am so that I can relate to my daughter as she's growing up in a different way.
Mhm, mhm.
And I appreciate so much that you are such an open book and without prodding into personal world. Is there anything that you could share there about that journey of who you are becoming and the impact on your family by being so consciously aware of changing how you do interact with your 12-year-old now?
It's actually, I have to give credit to Sabrina, my wife, because she was the one that brought up that. She's like, Lillian, you aren't on the same page right now. And it's not really incumbent upon her to try to fix that. She is a young girl. She's in going into her teen years, and she needs different things from you. So, you've got to think about how you show up as a dad and meet her where she's at. And I think for me, I had these habits and patterns and behaviors that I built as a dad with her that were working really well. It really gave us such a great relationship. And then they stopped working.
Mm.
And so between, the conversations with Sabrina, article she sent me, and then this wonderful book that Dr. Shafali wrote called The Parenting Map, I started to uncover the things that I needed to be doing differently and how I showed up for Lily as a dad, and to be intentional about those changes. So she hasn't done anything differently. She's just continued to grow and mature as a wonderful young lady, and I have shifted how I'm showing up for her, and it's like magic. Like it's unbelievable the difference, how closely connected he and I are. We spent the day yesterday wandering around downtown, going to get some food, going to the bank, like just running some errands. And then I said, well, do you want to go shopping? And hit all the stores on Robson Street, which is this like great shopping place in Vancouver. And then Pacific Center, which is this cool underground mall. We went to every store. We sniffed every candle in the candle store. And when I say every candle, it was probably like 100. And when we were walking back, after I don't know, we were probably gone 4 hours wandering around, she said, "Oh, do you have a lot of work this week?" And I said, "Well, yeah, but tomorrow's Sunday. So actually, I don't really have anything. I have the whole day off." And she's like, "Oh, great. So then we can hang out and spend the whole day together." And it's just like, it like melted my heart to
Hmm.
hear her say that. And that is really a shift in how I intentionally decided to show up differently and really meet her where she's at, meet her with the interests that she has, talk about the things she wants to talk about, like go to the places that she wants to go to. And those aren't the same activities, hobbies, those aren't the same conversations that we used to have. And I got stuck in a rut, really. As a parent, and I'm grateful that I have a wife who we have no problem giving and soliciting feedback. And so she felt really comfortable with coming up and saying, I don't think your style is working anymore. And I think you need to shift it. And that was the impetus for this change.
So powerful. It's so cool. And I often look to different generations to say, who or how can we change who we're becoming right now? Because I think we've hit a certain threshold. Perhaps it's, shortly after university. And now, therefore, you're an adult and you're going to have to play by like adult rules and regulations
Yeah.
and fit in this system. And then when you become older, my father is 75 and I'm realizing I have like a newfound compassion and love and patience. And I'm like, frick, Steph, where was that 10 years ago? Like, why did he have to hit this age for me to care so much? And anyway, it's just the sandwich generations, the older and the younger, are really inspiring to me and how we relate to them. And I think it speaks about, or it can give us pause for curiosity of how we relate with in our own generation, let's say. I was at a birthday party with some neighbors, the neighbors' kids' birthday party, and the dad was telling me that they're homeschooling their kids, and he's an executive with a local development company. And he was like, but I need to know that they're outperforming private school. And I was like, outperforming? Like they're 5 years old. What's with outperformance? Then he softened a little and he said, I learned this thing at work and I'm trying it at home. And I want to be a level 5 listener with my kids. And he said, I need to change how I listen to them because I
Mhm.
constantly listen to them waiting to respond. And I'm
Mhm.
missing the opportunity to just hear them.
Mhm.
And then we all had a giggle because we were like, oh, does that mean that you actually like pause and you take a breath before you respond to what your child has to say? And then he laughed and he was like, yeah, and sometimes they run away. Like they don't actually want to wait for me to take a pause. And perhaps that's the whole darn point that these kids are coming to dad, not for dad's response, just to tell dad something. And he was like, that's not how it works at work. Well, the joy of it not being at work at home.
And actually, there's another piece to it too, which I've noticed is that being comfortable with the uncomfortableness of being in silence. So to sit with my daughter, and sometimes, she's been at school all day, and then she has volleyball practice, and it's 5:30 at night, and I'm picking her up, and she's been over peopled, like she's just been peopled to the hilt. And then, she jumps in the car, and I'm like, "How's your day?" "Great," and then silent. "What'd you have for lunch?" "I can't remember." "How was volleyball?" "Good." I'm like, okay, she doesn't need this right now. I'm so excited to see her. I'm so excited to engage in conversation with her, and me interrogating her about her day just out of curiosity. I'm just genuinely want to know how she's doing. And so I've learned to both sit in silence and also just to share what's going on with me and not have the need to reply or respond. And so sometimes our drives home are very quiet. And then she goes in her room and then she's in there for a while. And then I see her later, dinner, and then our conversation happens then. Or our conversation happens like 4 hours later, and
Yeah.
she's like getting ready for bed. And then we have a conversation. And I've had to let go this need to become current with her as soon as she jumps in the car and to just try to meet her where she's at.
Hmm.
And that again, that's made a big difference in our relationship. And I didn't do it that way before and it didn't work. So
Yeah. Fair. Well, I wanted to talk about the generations. I wanted to talk about Lily
yeah.
because you are so open and sharing. And thank you,
Mhm.
Lily. If you're ever listening to this podcast, know that we appreciate you being up for this work in the world.
Yeah.
And I'm mindful that you've also been asked recently to be a keynote speaker at a conference of
Mhm.
business leaders as it relates to change. Now, they were a little bit specific around like, what does it mean to be in this hybrid workforce? This
Mhm.
is a timely moment in history. There's a lot of conversation of the return to work or not return to work. What is 5 days versus 3 days, remote versus hybrid. And there's a lot of pushback happening in that space. And what I feel mindful of is we look back and think, how much has changed with that? So it's like, yes, we might have been able to navigate the last 4 years remotely, but we also exist in doing things on Zoom or Teams in ways that we never did in
Mhm.
2019. And we also don't have to get on airplanes to do business deals anymore. Um, I feel mindful of this tug of war that feels like employer versus employee. And I
Mhm.
think sometimes what's missing is what is best for humanity or like what is best for everyone. And of course, naturally, as business owners, we think what is best for the bottom line. And I used to feel shame in saying that. And now I think it's so healthy because healthy bottom lines will help
Mhm.
keep healthy businesses and healthy humans. It will keep this beautiful ecosystem. And I want to talk about all of that. So without giving away your full keynote,
Mhm.
the same conversation of how are we navigating change as organizations right now? And you work with many leaders that have perhaps some very solid points of view, perhaps others that are changing. I'd love to know more of what's changing and less about what's not changing, Mike.
Well, I think the truest thing is to listen to actual leaders. And so, you and I are lucky in that we do this work where we're developing thousands and thousands of leaders across North America every year. So we get this inside scoop into talking to them. They just tell us what's really going on. So I always laugh because I read the newspaper or, Apple News, and there's next CEOs come out and said everybody's mandated back to work as of September, whatever. And I'm like, oh, here we go again. Is it 3 days, 4 days, 5 days this time? Or is it two? Like, what's the new mandate, right? And I think the world is still trying to figure out post pandemic, post March 2020, um, what it's supposed to look like in these hybrid environments. The easiest response for me is to say, well, there's before March 2020 and there's after. And so to say we need to go back to normal, the world's changed and the environment's changed, employees have changed. So there's no going back. Like there's just meeting reality where it's at. And so I always consider this magic moment where there's before and after this state. And so I think we're in that after stage, and it is to honor the changes that have occurred and figure out what is the best thing for our cultures. Ironically, so when I do get a chance to talk to executives who are in this space where they need to be at work 3 days a week, um, this is what the response is. So we're in 3 days a week. I said, oh, okay. So who? Well, the executive team. We need to be in 3 days a week together in the office. And it's always the same 3 days, usually like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And I'm like, okay. What about your team? Well, my team has to be in the office 3 days a week, but they pick what 3 days a week they are. And it's not the same as the executive team. And I said, oh, okay. And then your teams like work with a lot of cross-functional teams. Yeah, they're also 3 days a week, but they're a different 3 days a week. And so, okay. So what's your day like? She's like, well, I'm on Zoom pretty much most of the day in the office because of everything we've just described. Now, the executive team, sure, I can walk down the hall and I can chat with an executive who happens to be in the office, but they're in their office and I'm in my office. It's not like we're all hanging out in the kitchen together talking all day. So for me, whether I'm working at home as an executive on the ELT or I am working in this office, really the executive team meeting when we're all together in one room, I don't need to be here 3 days a week. That meeting happens once a week for 4 hours. So the irony is we're all just on Zoom. Is just the location that we're operating on Zoom. And she said, we've got offices everywhere. So people aren't flying in for these meetings. We're on Zoom with them to another office somewhere else in North America. Does it matter that they're actually at the office? Not to me. Like I'm on Zoom with them. So I think that the reality of where we are working now with the comfort and the ease of using tools like Zoom and Slack and Microsoft Teams to collaborate, this is the new world. I think if I had to guess where we're going to go, we're probably going to end up in a hoteling space where there'll be these cool offices and people won't really have an office, or maybe they will if they're more senior. And you'll be able to come and go to that office as makes sense, as you want to have more face-to-face interaction. I think people will be working more from their home environment and or whatever. They could be in a van traveling around North America as long as they've got good internet connection. They're working from that place. And we had the opportunity to work with TELUS back in 2010, and they had sold 75% of their real estate and sent everybody home. So they were the first major enterprise organization that I'm aware of in North America to say we're remote first. That's our culture. And they were already an international company with offices everywhere and teams already distributed. So having an office, I think the culture was from the office. Which one of the 100 offices are we talking about? Like, because the
Totally.
culture is distributed between teams that are working, they're all report to the same boss, but they're in 10 different offices. So we
Yeah.
saw that that worked. We patterned our business around it in 2009. And so when the pandemic came, I'm like, oh, okay, finally, the world's going to see that this is a cool way to work and it's going to be fine. And then they did. And now we're somehow saying, oh, no, 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 it doesn't work. We have to go back to the way it was. Yeah,
Mm.
so there's time. If you told me in 2020 it was going to take this long to shake this out, I figured in 2 years people would get that this is a pretty cool way to work. It drives culture, it drives a wonderful lifestyle for your employees, it drives balance, it drives resilience, and I'm still shocked that 4 years later we're still having this conversation. So it's just going to take more time to settle this all out.
Yeah. You speak of culture, and I am very proud of how I'm proud to be a part of Virtus, where people are across the country. Remote is real. We are in many locations and we make many locations work. And you did speak to the cultural implications. And I'm wondering if you can share how have you or how have you seen culture work or die? How have you seen culture change or thrive during not necessarily even remote work or otherwise, just in the last 4 years?
I don't think this has anything to do with culture. I think this has to do with boomers and Gen X leaders imagining that because people are in the office, they're being productive. I think this has to do with command and control. It has nothing to do with culture, because I can definitively say, having run a company that is remote first and has a hybrid hoteling scenario in place for 15 years, that our culture and our company has continued to grow and scale, that people have decided to move. We have a team member in the Philippines. We've had team members living in New York, Montreal, Toronto, Windsor, Calgary, the Vancouver Island, like all over the lower mainland. And productivity has to do with hiring great people, giving them the motivation or providing them motivation by allowing them to have autonomy, right? Understanding the purpose of what they do and allowing them to have mastery, right? So mastery, autonomy, and purpose is the work that Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, the psychologist, and Daniel Pink in his book, it's called Drive, talked about. If you give mastery to people or allow them to master their craft, you give them the autonomy to do the work in the way that best suits them and where as well. And then you tell them the purpose, how what they do connects to the overall culture. That's motivation. They will be intrinsically motivated. You don't need to do something extrinsically, something from the outside to motivate people. So I think if you hire great people for great roles, and then you do those things and you ensure that you give them feedback, both constructive feedback so that you can help improve and develop them, and also praising feedback. Hey, this is great. I love when you do this. This is the impact it has on me and others when you do these behaviors, that you can actually create a phenomenal culture. Nowhere in that description did I mention place being important because I just haven't seen it being true.
Yeah. I wonder, I totally hear you, and I think it's so valid, so excellent. I think there's a generational conversation that's enormous. I love that you're like, what was actually happening in an office or not in an office. And the conversation I'm curious about, though, is like the water cooler, is how
Yeah.
do we make up for those moments? And I don't know what you have or haven't read, but when we're hearing about, let's say, a certain company based in Seattle wanting everyone to return to the office right now,
Yeah.
I'm missing the point. I'm like, what is it? Like, is it that you can't wait to have coffee for everyone? Like, what's the piece? And so, without being sarcastic here, just
Yeah.
genuinely, truly
Yes.
curious, like the culture around human interaction, the culture
Hmm.
around like, this is how we do things. Have you found that it does or doesn't matter? Have you found that there's other ways? Have you found like, the motivational Venn diagram, so long as we have purpose, mastery, and autonomy, I don't think the water cooler matters as much. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, the truest thing I can say is that in 2009, all these cool tools that we have right now, like Microsoft Teams and Slack, they didn't exist, and we did
Right.
it, and they didn't exist for TELUS, right? Like we were in the intranet age at that point, right?
Yeah.
And so like PeopleSoft and those sorts of tools, SharePoint was kind of really the big one for enterprise back then. We used Yammer and Skype. So Skype was a video platform, very similar to Zoom, and Yammer would be pretty much the same thing as like a Slack would be. Ironically, Microsoft bought Yammer and bought Slack, and that's Microsoft Teams. So that's where that came from. And now you have like internally here at Vertus, we use Slack and we use Zoom. Although we have a full Microsoft Teams installation as well. Some of the development we do with our clients is through Teams, and that's their preference. So we use whatever platform they use. I would say that those platforms have Zoom and Slack for us, have enabled us to have a water cooler, to build great culture, to connect on a regular basis. Some of our, like the amount of celebration, you know this stuff, right? The amount of celebration and kudos and like hilarity, like the sheer, like the funniness of some of the conversations that occur at Virtus on Slack, like just makes my day. And I'm not sure I would have time for that in an office. Like I'm not sure I would make that kind of water cooler time. I can engage in an asynchronous fashion where to have that kind of like fun that we have on Slack, that would require everybody stopping what they're doing and gathering in a central area to do that. So ironically, you can actually create these cultural norms using these tools that, do I want to argue that they're better? I'm not sure I want to argue that. I would say they're different and they're good. So I'm not anti-office by any stretch of the imagination. We have a beautiful office. Every time I go to the office, I'm like, oh, this place is so nice. I get why everybody wants to go there. I go there twice a month. I find I'm most productive working from my home office or working from this cool coffee shop in Yaletown that I go to that I call my summer office and get a lot of joy, and I also get a lot of joy out of being in the office. And I notice that my working style is different. Not bad or good in these places. It's just different. And so depending on the task and what I'm trying to do, I decide how I want to use the tools, in-person meeting, the whole team in every quarter to do our quarterly rocks for our OKRs and bring everybody together to have time together to go for like to share a meal, to go for coffee, to just be in each other's space. We went mini golfing, we've done a bunch of fun stuff when people are in town, and I see the value of that. I absolutely do. I enjoy that. That's once a quarter, and I think that drives fantastic, or I've seen it drive fantastic culture here.
Yeah. Excuse me. Sorry, Katie. I'm inspired by something that you said around tools and the tools of change. And I don't want to say I care less about the tools of change at work. I'm just curious, and I guess I asked the question also because it's an inspiration to remember how much change we have absorbed, we are a part of, we're contributing to. If you were to just pause for a minute and think about what has been new in your life that has made your life so much better. So it's like by default, using Zoom now allows me to live in the mountains and do work with people around North America. And I'm so grateful for it. That's a work example. What is what are some things that have been new for you, have evoked change in a positive way in your life? Humans, I think humans
No,
matter,
not
and I'm great.
humans. You.
I'm grateful.
You. Just hear that. You.
Thank
Being in
you.
relationship with you for the last 9 months has invoked change, has
Mm,
invoked deep self-reflection, has
mm,
invoked gratitude. I am inspired by how you show up in the world, and I am changing as a human being. I'm changing as a leader. Thought process is shifting, and I am growing as a result of being in relationship with you. So my biggest answer is you, Steph Corker.
bless. You want to know something. I hear that and I really receive it. And I was like, gosh, he has so many cool things. You have a system and a process in your calendar, and you have all the things. And I was like looking for the next thing. And I think what I just take away from this is, and I love podcasts because I love listening to conversation. And I hope that as our listeners are listening, they're like, what are the questions that I can take to dinner tonight or to my team meeting? And in this season of change, whenever you're listening to this podcast, the power of being sparked with a question to ask someone, what has changed in your life? Who has changed? And what has made it better is pretty sweet. And I really just say thank you. I really receive that I've made you change, even just a little bit. I'm here for that. What question haven't I asked you about change that I should ask you?
I think the question I would ask is, how do you navigate change? Not just personally, but also how do you support navigating change for the people around you? And I can tell you what I've seen, which is that change is inevitable. We live as human beings in a place of change, and change is required for growth. It even ties into something like imposter syndrome, which someone that Steph and I, Adam Fry, Steph and I work with, who has a wonderful blog, wrote literally yesterday about imposter syndrome. And I was at the gym and recently, and somebody was asking about that. It's like, I face imposter syndrome all the time and I feel very alone in it. And I just wish I didn't feel this way because it does not feel good. And my response to him was feel imposter syndrome because you're doing epic things. You know who doesn't feel imposter syndrome? People who do the same humdrum thing on repeat over and over again. They will never feel like an imposter. And he's like, yeah, but sometimes I walk into a room and I feel like I don't belong in that room. Like everybody else there feels more successful. And I said, the worst room you can be in is to be the most successful person in the room because you are going to learn nothing. The fact that you're invited into that room means those people believe that you deserve to be there. And it's an honor to be around high performing people in whatever the thing is that they're high performing in life, because I know that that's my opportunity to grow. So, my biggest fear in life is that I won't feel imposter syndrome. That terrifies
Mm,
me. That means
mm,
I'm stuck and I've stopped growing.
mm,
So I think for change, that's the first thing I would consider is be in a place of imposter syndrome. It means you're doing epic things in the world, like cool shit's happening. In terms of helping navigate through change, though, I think understanding that there's a valley of despair that occurs because there's this wonderful quote from the CEO of Porsche North America. And he's like, nobody minds change, but nobody wants to be changed. And that is that when the change is applied to us and it feels like it's outside of our control, then that's when we go into what's called the valley of despair, and we go like we fight it. We're in denial. We're like, I don't like this, I'm mad about this, like I'm in denial that this is happening, it shouldn't be this way. And really we're like, okay, we're fighting reality, which reality is going to win. And so to get out of that valley of despair, I have to do it. I have to operate from a place of curiosity. What does this change mean? How do I embrace it? And how do I surf it? You almost got to think about it like if you jump into the ocean with a surfboard and you decide that you're going to decide how the waves work, it's not going to go well. If you get on your surfboard and you're like, okay, I'm going to move with the waves, you could actually have a lot of fun surfing. It's a very different experience. And change is exactly like that. Once I realized I don't have any control, and any control that I thought I had is always an illusion, and I can dive in and say, I'm going to go with the waves here. I'm going to jump on my surfboard and I'm going to watch how the waves are moving. And then I'm going to figure out how I can move with the waves. It's so much more enjoyable to be in change from that mindset. And that's where the magic shows up because then I can start thinking about, well, how is this change in my best interest? And how do I move through this change? And I have zero judgment about how long it takes for someone to move through that process. Plato has this wonderful quote, and it's masculine because, back
Yeah.
then feminism wasn't a thing. So I'll just say the quote is never judge a man or never judge a person who is making progress, no matter how slow that is.
Mm.
And I think with change, each of us is on that change curve and it's just taking time. So, one is a leader, empathy. Change is happening to people. We need to empathize that this thing is happening to them and they're surfing and they're still learning to surf. Some people are really good surfers and they embrace change very quickly, and other people on your team might not embrace that change as well. So then I question, is the message that I'm bringing to them about this change the right message? And you and I sat in a leadership team meeting this past week, Steph, where I explained a change that I was putting forward to leadership team. And one of our peers, Nadia, said, first part of what you said didn't resonate with me, but the last thing you said really landed. That's what I think you need to lead with on this change. And so partly as a leader is recognizing that the change may be good for everybody. How I'm communicating with it, I need to be deeply empathetic about why and how this change is good for them, not from a false you're going to love this type place, but instead from a place of empathizing, understanding what they're going through, and then saying, this is why I think this is the right thing for the organization. This is how I think it will be good for everyone here as well over time. And I get that this is still a lot of change for everyone to absorb. And that operating as a leader from that place of both empathy, which requires curiosity, asking people where they're at so that maybe they're in the valley of despair, maybe they're past that and they're on the upswing and they're actually starting to embrace the change, understanding where everybody on the team is at and then helping them locate themselves. And if you can locate yourself and just go, oh, I'm just in the valley of despair, and I can't skip that step. It's like, oh, this is just part of a change curve. That's fine. Okay. It just kind of takes some of the energy, the negative energy out of it. And it just helps me stay present to say, yeah, I'm here. I'm not going to be here forever. We'll move into a more curious, thoughtful, growth minded place on this change. And right now I'm stuck in the valley of despair. Just knowing that starts to move things along.
Yeah. It's so powerful listening to you say that because what I hear is that there's a difference being the leader that's evoking change, and there's something different being perhaps an employee that's absorbing change. So in some cases you're being told this is what's different, and it's like, how do you feel? You're back to the office 5 days a week, and does that fit with your life now, or whatever the change might be? And then as a leader, on a new direction, and you're there to stand for the change. And I actually on a walk this morning, we were walking by a river and we said, oh, gosh, in the journey of change, you can be a rock or you can be the river, you can be the water. And there's power in both. You can stay steadfast and true in your thoughts and your feelings, your experience, and you're going to get polished. And you might get a little bit worn down, but you won't move until something big comes and you know that the rain comes and then the big rocks do move. It just takes them a little bit longer to your point of time. Or you can be water, which might go really fast all the time, and the water flows and it finds its way. It always finds its way. And then my sweet partner said, but what if I'm the seal? And I just thought, of course, you can be a rock, you can be the water, or you can be the seal. And the seal pops its head up and it's here for play and it's here for joy. And I think sometimes we're rock, sometimes we're water. And if we're so lucky, we can be a seal. And there's something about that experience with change. I also really love what Mel Robbins, another delicious podcaster, talks about. That's like, just let people be themselves. Like, let them be in the valley of despair. I think you should go to the gym more. I don't want to. Let them not go to the gym until they want to go to the gym. So what is people, how people will do what they want to do. That being said, You are an executive that works with executives on changing their minds. And I'm curious how you help executives change their mind. And if that is the most important question of the podcast today, that might be the one. How can
Yeah.
you help someone change
Mhm.
their mind? I want to asterisk this that it is election season, and I am not here with any political point of view, and I don't think this should be politically charged. So may we keep politics out of this and say that that is a different sense of values and opinion, and this is perhaps more in the world of work or relationships. Sabrina is really great at helping you change your mind.
Mhm.
You work with leaders and you support them in changing perspective. How can we help someone change their mind?
I think that deep empathy and listening, that level 5 listening that you referred to earlier, is required first because most people don't care what you know until they know how much you care. And
It's a
right,
good
they
one.
don't care what you know until they know how much you care. And so step one is to deeply understand and empathize with their point of view. And just to be clear, empathy does not mean agreement. It means that I understand the worldview from which you're operating and why you have a certain belief pattern. And once you know I've heard you, and I could literally repeat back what your thought process is, pretty close. Doesn't have to be bang on, doesn't need to be precise, but it's close. And you'll say, "Well, you deeply understand me." Okay, so here's another thought. And I can share a different way. I will say with executives, proof works really well. Sharing stories from other organizations and other executives who've been in a similar place. I'm lucky that it's been, 24 years of having these types of conversations with executive team members from large organizations across North America. So I have a pretty good sample size to work with. And so when somebody brings something up, very few things surprise me. I've heard these things before, I've heard these situations, and I can share how it works out. Okay, well, here's your options. Here's three options about how you can approach this situation. So, versus approaching somebody and saying, there's only one way to do it, and it's the Mike way, and I'm going to tell you what it is, which would be comical because that's just never true. So, I'll say, yeah, there's three different ways you can approach this. And let me tell you stories about how this works out, depending on which one of these things you choose. I won't reference the name of the other executive or the brand. I might talk about the industry if it's relevant. And that usually has people sitting back and making their own mind up. Most people don't want to be told what they should do. They don't want to be should all over them. Sorry, it's not good to should all over them. And they don't want advice. They are willing to listen to stories. And these are intelligent people. And so asking great questions, sharing stories, sharing perspective, they can then take that, sit with that, reflect on it, and decide how they want to approach it. The most common thing that is said to me is, I really appreciate our conversations, Mike, because you've shifted my perspective. You gave me an option that I didn't even realize was available to me. Like I was thinking about it as a binary. It's either this or that, and you told me about like a third and fourth option I didn't even know existed. And those options are better than the binary options. They usually are, right? We live in a world of gray. And when somebody says to me, it's like this way or it's that way, I'm like, okay, well, now we're stuck, right? Because somebody's got to win and somebody's got to lose. And I'm not saying it's always, sometimes somebody does win and somebody does lose. It is, you are polarized. But for most things in life, there's some gray area you can probably have some common ground on about what really makes the most sense. And so I'd say that's the approach that I use in conversation. And I don't do regular executive coaching. What I do is with our clients, whoever the key people are that I know on the leadership team, usually the CEO, chief people officer, chief human resource officer, or actually any of the executive team, will just randomly call me out of the blue and say, "Okay, this just happened." And I don't know what to do about this. So what are your thoughts? And I just let them tell me their story. And sometimes they'll stop and they'll say, "Oh, okay, that was a very lengthy diatribe. I can't believe it just rambled." I don't hear it as rambling. I am categorizing everything they say because I've had lots of these conversations. And when they're done, I feed back to them, is this what I think I heard you say? Is this true? And they're like, yeah, like that's it. I'm like, see, that wasn't rambling. That was just giving me the information I need. Okay, great. Well, here are three things to consider. And that's what those conversations sound like.
I love it. I love it. And I really hear the power of listening, of level five listening. I hear the power of storytelling. I hear the power of proof. Proof is in the pudding. Let it be so. And it made me think, so I want to leave us with like, when are you being a rock? When are you being a river? Because the other idea is like with change, sometimes rivers flow too quickly. So there's something to be said for the speed at which all of this is being absorbed. And then when are you being a seal? And how powerful to be a seal? Like when do you pop up to be a seal? And it made me think of work I did with a brilliant creative director out of Portland. And she said, I'm always going to give you or a client three options. I want to show you that I've heard you, I'm listening. You go to a creative director, you go to a creative agency because you want change. You want something different. And she said, but most of the time clients want just more of the same. They just don't know it. And so I
Mm.
give them back the three options and then I throw in a flamingo. And why I say that is because you were saying here we are in this world of gray and we're totally in a sea of gray. And the flamingo, her, is the option of pink, of pop, of something different. It's on one leg, it has a fluffy bum, its head might be tucked away, its head might be sticking up, all metaphorically speaking. And I think that is the piece that's missing in change, or not to say it's been missing in this conversation, the power of being in relationship so that change can be fun. I think we don't equate it to right now. I'm just going to say in 2024, and perhaps it's like from 4 years of how much change can we absorb? Another change. There's so much change. And what I just want to offer as human beings is that I think we can absorb a ton of change. And we do, we live in this space. I want to remind you, do you know that McDonald's in my hometown now does not have humans in the kitchen? They have a general commissary, and you walk in, and a robot spits out your burger. And do you know that now my father, who's 75, does not check out his own groceries? He was like, I love going to line and somebody bagging my groceries. Not only does somebody not bag your groceries, they don't even put them across the scale anymore. And do you remember on public transit, once upon a time, you bought a ticket? You don't buy a ticket, there's no one there. It's a machine. You load up a card and then you get on a train.
That
Like
driver will be gone soon too,
the
right? There
driver,
won't be drivers of those buses. The interesting thing, just to riff off this with you, so Starbucks did something really fascinating. Starbucks, as they were going on their big, they're reducing the number of their stores now as they've realized they oversaturated the world.
the market. Yeah.
One of the things they realized is that in their store growth was it was training people how to make great coffee was really challenging.
Mm.
Using all the machines, getting a consistent pour of the espresso, like it actually took quite a bit of time and energy to teach somebody. And they have really high turnover in that space, right? I don't know what their turnover is now. It's probably at least 200%, which means they're completely turning over their workforce twice a year. And so, particularly with seasonality with kids, going to school and things like that, what they realized is that their customer is an uncaffeinated human being. A lot of the times early in the morning, sometimes later in the day, coming in, get their favorite beverage. What's more important is the experience they have with the team members at Starbucks. And so when they realized that, they said, well, maybe we should automate all the machinery of making the coffee so that they just have to push a button. And we could take those training dollars and we could teach them emotional intelligence and how to relate to people who are maybe not at their best, uncaffeinated, 6 a.m., waiting for their coffee in a lineup, or maybe their order was done wrong and that has to be replaced. And so to create a better environment for their employees and a better environment for their team members, they put all of it in to their team members could show up with empathy for their customers and curiosity. And they took all the money out of training people how to use the machines. And they automated as much of that as they possibly could.
It's genius. It has me on the edge of my seat. It's, if I could have a TED talk or a Red talk, I just want to say we don't get to slow down anymore. That's the
Mhm.
point. We don't get to say it's been so much change, so let's slow down, because the reality is everywhere else in the world, the change is happening at exponential rates that we don't have a say on. We don't get to pick the lineup that will give us the ticket with the person because that person doesn't exist anymore. And yet, in our circle or our environment of influence, we want to say to our boss, please don't change that, or this is a lot of change. And really, the only constant is change now. And you get to pick if you want to be on or off the bus. And the piece that's missing is when that feels so binary, the on or off the bus. It's like you're in or you're out. You want this or you don't want this. And what I want to be in the conversation of, and this is bringing it back to joy of, and your point of empathy of like, get it, that it feels like a lot. And so, what
Mhm.
is needed to help you stay on the wave and surf it? Because you can stay in the valley of despair for as long as you want, or you can stay in being upset about something. The change is happening. And now, what is needed to keep moving? And I just look and think the leaves drop at this time of year all of the time. The rivers start flowing. The rocks will start moving. And may we not be so binary. May we not stay stuck on one way or another and forget to have some fun. Like, all of this has felt so heavy for 4 years for so many folks. And the change, I don't know many of the changes that do feel like joy, that make us stand a little taller, that make us say, I'm going to try something new. I'm going to just dance with this because what if it
Mhm.
could be awesome? And do you realize the gravitational pull of change is going to suck? Change, something's not fair for me. That's what comes up
Mhm.
a lot. It's not fair.
Mhm.
What about
Mhm.
this isn't fair? I mean, our brows furrow and we just get a little bit crunchy. And I just want us all to take a deep breath and roll our shoulders back and say, what if the change could only be better? And how can we help be leaders of better and builders of better? And I think that is why I wake up every morning so excited to do this work with you, to create the tools and the conditions for leaders of organizations of better. And I think that's the name of change. And if you were Lily's dad, you'd want to be a better dad. And
Mhm.
I think those are the leaders we all want to come and work for. So you have something else to say. We're not ending here. What was the last thing you wanted to add in?
I think the challenge, like when we recognize that change is going to happen, the period of time between recognizing the change has occurred and acceptance, the stressful part's the part in between.
Hmm.
So I get to decide how long I want to spend in the stressful part
Yeah.
because acceptance is a choice I get to make. Nobody else gets to accept on my behalf and tick that box. I have to do it. And
Yeah.
so once I realize that the change is happening and I accept that that's the case, now there are certain things that are in my control, in which
Mm,
case I don't have to accept it. I can affect
mm,
change right back at change. But
mhm,
let's say for a lot of things in life, I don't actually have that level of control. So when I realize that it's not in my control, then the faster I move to acceptance, the less stress I'm going to have in my life, and the more I can be proactive about the decisions on the other side. Because creativity,
mhm,
action, and the future are on the
mhm,
other side of acceptance.
mhm.
They're the after part. They don't come before that. The before part is just the stressful part.
Yeah. And the same. I just, as you were speaking, I saw, and I want you, if you're listening, to think of a tightrope or if you're a slack liner. And it's like you can be on one tree where the slack line or the tightrope originates, and that feels one way. If you want to experience the euphoria of crossing the chasm to the other side, you've got to go across the tightrope. You've got to go across the slack line to the other side. It's how long do you want that to be? When are you going to put your first toe on the line? And then on the other side, you get to look back and think, I freaking did it. Like, look what just happened. And you don't get that feeling if you stay on the first tree. So you're so right. How long do you want that moment of stress, which is natural, which I think comes full circle to being an imposter is a form of stress in your life, and it's a stress that will make you better. Mike, thank you for your time. Thank you for hitting record. Thank you for letting us flip the script. Thank you for asking and sharing so wholeheartedly. I'm really pumped about the Mike method, and I'm stoked that I get to be on here. So I hope it's not the last time. And here's to fall.
I appreciate you flipping the script and hosting and leading the show today. It's been a pleasure, Steph. Thanks for your time.